Hey, this is Alex Shaw, and you're listening to The Soul of Life.
I tell you that you're pretty, 'cause I can't get enough.
Why do we run? When Vybarr Cregan-Reid set out to answer this question, he began a journey into the science and psychobiology of the human body, which, he says, is born to run.
We've been runners for about 2.3 million years.
In this episode of The Soul of Life, we talk about Cregan-Reid's book, Footnotes, How Running Makes Us Human, and a passion for running that took him to the world's most advanced running laboratories and research centers to learn why natural running barefoot, is being embraced by running enthusiasts as the solution to foot, leg, and knee injuries that some scientists attribute to modern running shoes.
So running shoes usually have a heel-to-toe differential, so there's a sort of slight platform aspect. What that means is it alters the runner's gait so that nearly all runners end up running onto their heel.
Cregan-Reid says your body knows more about running than you ever will. And our discussion is equally for those who say they can't run or hate to run as much as it's for running enthusiasts.
It's like saying you can't drive a car. Cars are designed to be driven. Almost everything about them is optimized for being driven.
Learning to let your feet teach you how to run doesn't happen from going fast.
There aren't many experiences in life where we measure our success, the speed with which we can do it. Like having sex, you're not going to boast about, I did it in 10 seconds.
He says it takes guts to run slow, but doing so makes you less likely to get injured and more likely to engage the body's endorphin system, the runner's high.
If it's enjoyable, why not enjoy it and make it last?
We discuss the range of benefits from running in natural settings and debate the barefoot running phenomenon.
My uncle, he went to 2 Olympics. He was a barefoot runner.
Is the stress that most of us learn to associate with competitive running the reason why many people seem turned off to running for life?
I'd run like I was running for a boss or something. And, that kind of running usually makes you feel quite nauseous and it's deeply unpleasant.
Welcome to The Soul of Life. I'm Keith Miller.
I'm still not a great runner.
And this is Season 2, Episode 11. Footnotes, How Running Makes Us Human.
Oh my God, you've got to stay away from the forests.
I'm Keith Miller, and my podcast, The Soul of Life, is here to help you remember who you really are. I'll bring together people who have gotten off their treadmills. I'll have conversations with athletes, musicians, doctors, scientists, healers, and entrepreneurs to discuss the fascinating edges of our knowledge in neurobiology, psychology, and physics. This is The Soul of Life. Please take the time now to subscribe to The Soul of Life wherever you're listening. Give it a thumbs up or write a positive review. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss out on these amazing episodes planned for Season 2. Vybarr Cregan-Reid is a British author, academic, and broadcaster. He works at the University of Kent, where he is a professor of English and environmental humanities. He's the author of Footnotes, How Running Makes Us Human in 2016, and more recently, Primate Change, How the World We Made is Remaking Us in 2018. Cregan-Reid's research and writing about the physiology of running follows in the footsteps, pun intended, of many others on this topic, most notably Christopher McDougall, the 2009 author of what some have called a game changer in the sport and in sports medicine of running. The bestseller Born to Run. I might have called that book Born to Run Barefoot. McDougall follows members of the reclusive Tarahumara Indian tribe in the Mexican Copper Canyons. Repeatedly injured as a runner himself, McDougall wonders how the tribe members can run ultra distances over 100 miles at incredible speeds without getting the routine injuries most American runners get. Cregan-Reid and McDougall come to the same conclusion. Both overcame running injuries by learning to run as they claim nature intended it, barefoot. They assert that modern cushioned running shoes are a major cause of running injury, pointing to the long history of humans clotting about with scant foot protection, and in fact, rising to apex predator because of our ability to hunt over vast distances before we had Nike Airs. Looking back even at our early American history, I've often marveled at the stories of the Revolutionary Army marching, practically and often literally barefoot, hundreds of miles in the winter. And I wonder how such a feat is humanly possible. You'll have to get used to these puns today, I'm afraid. Professor Cregan-Reid joins me today to marvel with me at what he calls the age of movement famine, how we have let our feet and arches and much of our physical bodies atrophy, and how the average runner has at least one foot or leg injury each year. A phenomenal rate, something he notes would be like a fish having an epidemic fin injury rate. We talk about the anthropology and the physiology of running that he so compellingly lays out in his book, Footnotes, How Running Makes Us Human. Welcome, Dr. Cregan-Reid. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Very good. I'm delighted to see you. You're my first international guest here on The Soul of Life. It's a privilege to speak about running today with you. I was really turned on to find your book. I've been a runner my entire life, and so have you, it sounds like. So I'm interested to hear about your story about running.
Yeah, on and off. I'm still not a great runner. I was always like third or fourth in my class at school. No matter what class I was in, I was always like third or fourth at sprinting. And like lots of young people, I really struggled to transition from sprinting to longer distances because I was always a little kid who wanted to go as fast as he possibly could. And that's not really compatible. Exercise at all. I'd occasionally go out and run, but I'd run like I was running for a bus or something. And, that kind of running usually makes you feel quite nauseous and it's deeply unpleasant. And then I kind of started flirting with it again in my late 20s and early 30s. And at that point, I just got it. And it became, it ended up becoming a part of my life in a way that it hadn't been before. But one of the curious things that I had really just serially forgotten throughout my life was that my uncle was an incredible runner. He ran for his country. He went to 2 Olympics to run marathons, to compete in the marathons. He competed in European championships. He got a gold, in fact, at a European championship. I think it was in 1966. He was a barefoot runner. His trainers later put him in shoes when he started to run, for want of a better term, professionally. But he never really felt comfortable in them. But the trainers were always telling him, no, this is better, this is better. So he did compete mostly in shoes, but he learnt everything that he learnt about running without using any shoes at all. He came from a very poor Irish background. There were no, running shoe shops in the. I was going to say in the town, but in the county, I'm fairly sure there would have been no running shops. So it was something that had been, in the back of my mind the whole time. And then in my 30s, I found that I really, really needed some long form ruminative exercise, and running was perfect for that.
When I grew up in my house, my brothers were all runners. They were older than me. And so that's sort of just what I grew up we're going to run. Having the body frame helped for it.
Yeah.
And so there's always this expectation in our house that I was going to run. There's a Nike poster on the wall. I still remember it. Huge Nike poster, picture of a meandering path that this runner was on at the very bottom of the hill. You can see the whole road, and it's a Nike poster. It says, "The roads are always open." And that for me, I have had a love-hate relationship with running. Competitive running, hated it. My brothers were always superstars, and I never wanted to put the time in to do that. But over time, I remember developing a relationship with running to deal with emotions. And I think this is something you talk about in Footnotes a great deal. And I want to point out today, we'll talk about barefoot running. We'll talk about some of the physiology, fascinating science that you report on this, but also for people who don't really think they can run. I think this is for those people too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, one of the things that I learned from writing Footnotes was just it's like saying, you can't drive a car. Cars are designed to be driven. Almost everything about them is optimized for being driven. And although that we spend a lot of time not thinking about our bodies, especially when we're younger, like in our 20s and 30s, when for most of us, our bodies are pain-free and we don't really think a great deal about their physiology. I teach at the med school in Kent, and I was talking to some of the students there this week, and we were talking about the physiology of the foot. Like, what does this tell us about human beings? And none of them said that we're obligate bipeds. That this tells us a great deal about how we evolved to move. That we evolved to move longitudinally. Everything in the human foot and lower leg is optimized for producing that longitudinal power. Our bodies are really designed to run. Everything from the fact that we have like very flat faces, to that we have short little toes that are much more powerful. All of it is about being optimized to run. And then there's also kind of
the ability to dump heat quickly. Right.
pause rather, but not really much else. And humans can dump incredible amounts of heat. And also because we're bipeds, on a hot day, the sun only hits maybe as little as 40% of our bodies, whereas for a quadruped, it's about 70%. So it means that a quadruped is taking on a lot more heat and is less efficient at dumping it, whereas we take on less and are efficient at getting rid of it. So it makes us, it makes us lethal weapons, is what it makes us. It's the reason I wrote in an article once that sweat is one of the main reasons that we made it to the top of the food chain.
And is that a more recent anthropological theory, Dr. Cregan-Reid? Is that something like, I think people have often, my understanding is that it's been, our brain has evolved. We've become complex predators, apex predators, because our complex ability to think, form groups. Is this the idea that running, and specifically long distances, outrunning any other animals, is that a newer type of theory?
It's one of those things where there isn't a thing. You can't really say that there's just one thing that is responsible for humans being human, because everything's connected, right? But if we're talking about sweat and we're talking about brain size, as we look at each other in our little Zoom pictures, we can both see a very large, well, in my case, a very large exposed forehead. I mean exposed because of my receding hair. I don't mean because of the size of my brain.
It's an evolutionary advantage.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary advantage. The fact that we sweat so much from our forehead, it means that over millions of years, the people that have been able to do that have been more likely to survive. It's been more likely that they've been able to keep their brains cool during a hunt. They've been more likely to get to the end of the hunt and to continue existing until the point when they can reproduce. So the fact that we have these exposed foreheads for these large brains, our foreheads are the brain's cooling system. So everything just sort of knits together in the human body,
right,
to optimize us for running in Africa.
Now, you talk about this physiological frenzy that results in the body from running. And I think you describe it as something that's really unlike any other physical activity, and particularly running outdoors. I want to point out to readers, and I hope people who are runners or want to be runners or just want to be more healthy, pick up your book and read it, because it's not just chock full of science, which it is, but you're a humanities writer. I mean, you write from the literature perspective, and you really do a great job bringing us into the landscape, and that's a big piece of it. But tell me about the physiological frenzy that happens.
Yeah, I think I called it the psychobiological frenzy. by saying that, I was trying to convey that it's not just one thing. So lots of people that do any kind of exercise or aerobic activity will know about, well, it gets called the runner's high actually, but they'll know that it's on endorphin release. Exercise releases endorphins, but that doesn't really explain the kind of intensity of that feeling of joy and power and relaxation that comes when you get a really good runner's high smacks you in the face. So the psychobiological frenzy is really about all of these things happening at once, where you get endorphin release, gives us feelings of euphoria. It usually does this after about 45, 50, 60 minutes of exercise. And from an evolutionary perspective, it's doing that because you're likely to be getting tired now. You're probably going to be getting a bit sore. So endorphins also have an analgesic properties where they're basically pain killing as well. But then there's other things that happen as well. We have a layer, a fatty layer around our brain called the blood-brain barrier. And what that does is it protects us from when we get a cold or a flu. It means those things actually can't get into our brain, that there's this very effective filter. And this filtration system means that endorphins that are made in the body actually can't make their way into the brain either. So there's another system in the brain called the anandamide system that's also activated and has all of those similar effects again, heightening all the effects that endorphins have for us. So you get kind of multiple things happening, like multiple parts of your body are involved in creating the sort of neurological frenzy that can result from an extreme high. Some people never get them, which is very sad.
Well, you have to get to a certain past a pain point, maybe a threshold of conditioning, perhaps, to get to that, because it's more than just a 20-minute. I mean, if we do what the government or science tells us to do, the bare minimum 20 minutes.
So yeah, you do have to get to a certain level of fitness. You have to be an intermediate runner. But you also have to be a runner to get a runner's high. You also have to be a runner that hasn't got an appetite for running fast. Because it seems like most people that get regular runner's highs are quite ambulatory runners. They're quite happy to just sort of bob along at their own pace.
Not sprinters. You say it takes guts to go slow.
It takes guts to go slow. Well, I would say that, wouldn't I? It's just self-praise.
I ran into this club over here in some online group. It's the Slow AF Club. It's good. The running club, it's just call it what it is. But good. So why is that? Why does it take guts to run slow? Why is it important? That could be applied for me when I ski. I just went to the Rockies in Colorado, came back skiing. The older I get, the more I realize slowing down is much more fun.
It is much more fun. And I just think if anybody, so one of the big problems, it's what we've just been talking about, is there's a really big, deeply structural societal problem with adherence to exercise. And it's very basic. If you make your exercise unpleasant, you're not going to do it.
Right.
And I think lots of people's relationships with running, for example, people that don't run, their memories of it are soiled by their experience of running at school, which was to run as quickly and as fast as you can.
Sort of a winners take all, zero sum.
Yeah. And you just think there aren't many experiences in life where we measure our success on the completion of it in this, with the speed with which we can do it. Like forgive me, like having sex, you're not going to boast about, I did it in 10 seconds. So, the whole point is, if it's enjoyable, why not enjoy it and make it last? So I'm all for running slowly. It also means that you're getting, more cardiometabolic benefits from your exercise by going slow, and you are much more likely to enjoy it because you won't find it so unpleasant.
Right.
I think doing something that makes you feel sick, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
That's why people really struggle to stick to any kind of exercise that involves high intensity interval training.
Right. Yeah, right. CrossFit is a big thing in our basically exercising to the point. I think this was one of their main things until you're throwing up, until you're past the point of exhaustion. Like that's the goal. So I think you point out that most high intensity or speed runners train at 80% of the time below their maximum.
Yeah,
that's just right. Part of good training.
Part of good training. So 80% is the low hanging fruit of fitness is done by. It's about the amount of time that you spend doing the training rather than the intensity with which you do at it. Also, there's a very strong link between levels of intensity and injury.
Mm-hmm. Say more about that, because this is something that took you to the Spalding running laboratory, National Running Center in Cambridge, and some of the world's leading experts on running and the physiology of running.
Yeah, Daniel Lieberman turned out to be just around the corner in Harvard, so I also went to see him too. He's a fantastic individual. So yeah, I went to see Irene Davis, who she's in Born to Run. Actually, she's in Born to Run. So she works at the Spalding National Running Center. So I went there to find out what work they were doing. She told me all sorts of interesting things about running shoes and the shoe industry.
What happens when we put a shoe on this foot that is arguably, really, I don't think it's arguable to scientists. It's been quite well established that the foot was designed to support itself over great distances without a shoe.
Yeah. So what happens when you put a shoe on? I think people are really struggling to understand the answer to it's such a simple question, isn't it? Like biomechanically, you just think, well, go on a treadmill and we'll film you in slow motion and we'll be able to see exactly what happens in a shoe. We do know that some things happen. So running shoes usually have a heel to toe differential. So there's a sort of slight platform aspect. And what that means is it alters the runner's gait, so that nearly all runners end up running onto their heel. So when you take away all of that cushioning, what happens is, without thinking, if they're on a hard surface, it doesn't work on things like wet sand. But if you're on a hard surface, everybody switches over to either a forefoot or what's called a midfoot strike. Midfoot strike is when kind of the whole foot, the front and back, the toes, everything comes down at exactly the same point. A forefoot strike is when it's obviously the forefoot comes down. And
that is the more natural version of running, where the spring action comes in from the...
Yeah, so in the olden days, before shoes were invented, people had high arches in their feet. And this arch is created by 4 layers of arch muscles. It doesn't exist in your skeleton. The arch doesn't exist in your skeleton. It's the arch is really made by the muscles pulling the metatarsals and the phalanges back towards the heel. It's a muscle pulling it back and creating an arch where we kind of vault away from the earth. And then what happens is, as when the forefoot strikes, the heel then comes down afterwards. And then as our center of gravity passes over the foot, about 2.5 times our body weight gets loaded into that arch, and it springs back with such force in a person whose arches are functioning correctly. It springs back with such force that it actually returns 15%. Actually, I think it might be 17% of our body weight. So just that simple mechanism saves you having to lift 15% of your body weight with every foot strike.
And that adds up a lot over
that adds up
Miles.
incredibly quickly. And, if you think what's
Forces.
15% of your body weight, and you do, let's say 1,600 steps per mile. Just going to get a calculator going here.
Get some trigonometry. Yeah. Some.
So 1,600 steps per mile, 1,600 multiplied by. Oh, we're working in pounds, aren't we?
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately. That's over. If you run a mile, that means you've saved £7,000.
Wow. Conversely, you've absorbed it on your heel. It shoots up your leg, to your knees, your back.
Yeah.
All those injuries.
So there's always shock in a foot strike. Shock always moves up the body with a foot strike. But what it looks like is that, and it's very hard to describe on a podcast, but what you get is, if you measure the shock of a foot strike for someone that's a 4-foot runner, what you get is a very sort of smooth, like if you asked a child to draw a hill.
Like a parabolic, really.
Yeah, you get a smooth parabola. But if you give somebody a cushioned shoe, the way that the heel comes down means that the shock moves up the body. It happens much more quickly, so you get a very sharp spike followed by a parabola. And they are still trying to work out what this actually means for the human body. But anybody, I think, that questions whether shock is bad for the human body, just look at a car accident. Shock and the human body don't get on all that well. So it looks like 4-foot running is much more natural. But for me, the biggest persuader is the historical argument, which is Eric Trinkhaus, who's a paleoanthropologist, published an article on this a few years ago. I forget what year it was, but he was looking at the emergence of shoes, and he was interested in whether our skeletons, the bones in our feet, especially fossilized bones in feet, had changed as a result of the invention of shoes about 40,000 years ago. And he found that they had the feet and the muscles and the muscle attachments on the bones had actually started to atrophy. So if you think that we've been wearing cushions, so my uncle didn't wear shoes at all, but that was unusual even in the 1960s.
Right.
And then cushioned running shoes didn't really begin to appear until probably the late 80s. But bearing in mind, human DNA or hominin DNA, it goes back about 2.3 million years. We're not sure about, whether Homo habilis was an endurance runner, but we are absolutely sure that Turkana boy, who was a nearly complete Homo erectus skeleton discovered in Kenya, they are absolutely. Turkana boy has the full endurance suite. So he has the right holes in his skull for the vestibular ocular. I can never say this. Vestibular. Let's call it the vestibular system.
Better do than me. Keeps the head from falling over on running, right?
Yeah. So it means you can bob your head from side to side. So if you did it now on the Zoom with me, you'd still be able to focus on my face really, really easily.
Stable vision.
And if I held up a piece of paper for you to read, you could move your head from side to side.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
And you'd still be able to read it. If you did it the other way, with your head going up and down, you wouldn't be able to do anything. So it's a system that's really optimized for that side-to-side shift. That and Turkana boy has that. He has the right holes around his ears, around his skull for that. So we've been runners for about 2.3 million years. Now, if you compress the lifetime of modern hominin, let's call us modern hominin DNA. If you compress the lifetime of modern hominin DNA into the 9 to 5 of a working day, where you turn up at your office at 9 a.m. and that stands for 2 million years ago, and then 5 p.m. is the present. So 2 million years ago is 9 a.m. 5 p.m. is the present. You just think, well, how much time is the 1980s to today in the context of that bigger story of human life? And it's about, let me think. It's about 0.1 of a second.
It's a blip.
I think if you said blip really, really quickly, you'd use up about 5 of those 0.1 seconds.
Yeah.
It's
that fast. Yeah.
It's so fast that, you'd miss it if you blinked.
Right. We're Dr. Davis, Irene Davis, points out that shoes are allowing you to outrun your natural ability.
Yeah.
And that's what leads to these injuries, right? I noticed this. And we should talk about sort of what it's like and how you transition to barefoot running. I think some people would be interested in this and also interested in the controversy of this. This is interesting because first thing that came to my mind is like, well, that's crazy. Like, that's silly. If that was really the best way to run, we would see NBA teams, professional sports, professional soccer teams, football teams, they would be giving up shoes, like, because their body parts are worth millions of dollars. Like
But we do see those people. I mean, we see anybody that's involved in any kind of martial arts, anybody that does ballet or dance, people that require precision movement.
I'm somebody I have very high arches, and over time began to get plantar fasciitis, as complaint of many athletes, but especially with high arches, went through a lot of problems with knees as a result of that and everything else, and then eventually got orthotics to support the arches, and that cures it, essentially cures it. But then reading your book, I thought to myself, well, gee, this makes a lot of sense. I've effectively gone in the other direction. My body's been telling me you need more strength at this point in your body because it's hurting. Even in certain shoes, it's hurting. And so I just we were at the beach one day and for a week, for an extended period, and started running very short distances. Now, I would have previously probably tried to run a mile at the beach and then hurt so bad that would figure, well, never going to do that again. That was stupid. But after reading your book and realizing, okay, take a step back here, right? Let's just try running 5 minutes barefoot on the beach. A little more cushion on the beach. Obviously, there's other issues with rotation and so forth. But work up to 10 minutes. So after a week, I was running comfortably on the beach.
After a week?
Yeah, after a week, it didn't take me long. Now, then I get back and I say, well, I can go to a soft, grassy field. Now, it was also probably about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was a bad combination. Feet got very cold. Ground was cold. Ground was hard. And that hurts. But I could do it for 5 minutes. Whereas before, Vybarr, I would have been cringing. I mean, having the plantar fasciitis symptom can take weeks to recover from.
Oh, no. It can take months. It can take months and months, yeah.
Yep. So without a problem. Now, but I've since thought about that. Like yesterday, I went out and run, stayed on the grass, much harder work, right? And then, but also notice even hilly grass, like just enjoyed and slowed down and went at the pace I could go.
Yeah.
And so that I
so
got something from that.
I would say that because we've spent so much of our time in shoes that we default to thinking soft surfaces are better for us. But actually, nobody wants a challenging surface that's got anything sharp on it or gravel. That's not a good idea. Yeah. But very hard, smooth surfaces are actually very good. So if there's smooth concrete, the reason it's good is because you get really good, clear feedback from how you're running. Mm-hmm. And if what you're doing is using the cushioning to slow down the shock of soft grass, you won't be able to do that on concrete.
I see.
So it's very good for gait training to actually run on concrete. Also, if it's cold, if the ground is cold, it disrupts the level of feedback that you're getting because the nerves in the subcutaneous receptors in your feet aren't as responsive.
They go numb in like a minute, yeah.
Yeah, so that can be a bit risky because you might have done something and you won't know about it until your feet warm up a bit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's risky.
It is, yeah. What books do you recommend for somebody interested in testing out natural running? Please take the time now to subscribe to The Soul of Life wherever you're listening. Give it a thumbs up or write a positive review. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss out on these amazing episodes planned for season 2.
Well, but yeah, gosh, Born to Run is just fantastic, isn't it? It's probably still number 1 in the running chart on Amazon. I've not actually checked recently. But Born to Run is amazing. I really like, I've got enormous respect for Daniel Lieberman. He's done 2 books now. Well, he's done more than that, but he's done 2 trade books, one of which is called The Story of the Human Body, which is fascinating. And he's also just published another one more recently called Exercised. It's about the evolutionary history of exercise. And one of the ones that I read recently that I really enjoyed was The Lost Art of Running by Shane Benzie. I think it only came out about 6 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very interested in the kind of employing the innate elasticity of the human body. So he's all about loading the body so that energy can be returned to it. So a little bit like what I was saying about the arch, but using it throughout the gait cycle, finding ways of using elasticity to propel you forwards. They'd be my recommendations.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. No, learning to run slightly forward has completely changed my experience running.
With a slight forward lean.
Mm-hmm. Letting my toes, do the striking. And boy, the calves, I mean, it's taken me months to acclimate to how much pain how much, how little I can actually run, first of all, in that proper form. But then eventually how much easier my gait is once those muscles get conditioned to running forward. So there's a lot you can do, even if you're going to stay in shoes. There's just a lot you can do to correct some heel striking.
Yeah, there is. I mean, you could buy either shoes like Vibrams, which I haven't got a pair here, but I
got a shout out to, by the way, that company Vibram was it was founded in a very tiny rural town in rural Massachusetts, where I grew up, North Brookfield, Massachusetts. That's where the factory is. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway.
No, I think they're great. There's a British company called Barefoot. They're very good as well. And what they do is both companies specialize in shoes that have a very, very thin sole. And I think I've learned over the years that what I personally prefer is not no cushioning, but just a very, very tiny bit. Mm-hmm. Just a very, very tiny bit.
Kind of like a shoe you can roll up in your hands? Is that like a running flat, like a sprinter's flat?
Yeah, that.
That would make me cringe right now. But I could see it.
Yeah.
Tell me about your experience, I guess, running outdoors, because that's a big part of your book. I think every chapter or every section of your book is broken up into some of the science and the research and the people you meet researching the foot and the body, but also going to moss forest, the lake region in Europe. In the UK. And, that rings really true for me. My son and I did a big trek across the Grand Canyon here in Arizona last spring, about a year ago, right as COVID was hitting. We decided we had this thing planned. We're going to go. Everything was shutting down. We got out there. We were by ourselves. We had 60 pounds on our back. We were walking, but great distances, over 5 days. It was just something. It's hard to put into words, and you do a wonderful job putting it into words.
Thank you very much. So Footnotes it came out in 2016, so it came out 5 years ago, but I was writing it on and off for maybe 2 or 3 years before then. And I reread it just recently, and it's so much time has now gone by that they no longer feel like my words. And it was lovely to read the section on the Lake District. Mm-hmm. I'm so proud. I can't believe that I did it. So yeah, that sounds arrogant, doesn't it, to say you admire your own work?
I think I get it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, normally it takes you normally hate it for about 3 years, and afterwards you think, it's only then that you can see it fresh. But yeah, so most of the book is about running outdoors, because although we've focused a lot on the biomechanics of running, which is what we've been talking about now, I'd say at least half of the book is about the psychological aspects of both exercise, but in particular exercising outdoors, and
sensory
why
experience.
Yeah, and why it's so important for the human body, and just to feel like it's being used. It's really about how like the really deeply rooted connections that humans have with the outdoors. And I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor to meet with several environmental psychologists to talk about what greenness means to us, like why it's so important for us to be around green things and to be in green spaces. And environmental psychology, it's such an interesting field. It's quite a young field. It's only been around for about sort of 40 or 50 years. But it's one of those fields where whenever you read the papers that get published in the journals, you read the first 3 sentences of the abstract, and it will be something like, we decided that we wanted to find out if people recovered quicker from operations if they had a view of a green space compared with those that didn't. And as soon as you read the setup, you just think, and I know the outcome of this.
Yeah, it's like because obvious in hindsight.
Yeah. So all of the outcomes in these papers, they're all, I mean, I suppose this is how people get funded, isn't it? But to say it's so predictable sounds like I'm being denigrating, but I'm not. I've got huge respect and admiration for the work that they do. But it is all the same. It's all saying we really need green things. We need green things in ways that we do not understand, mm-hmm. but the body responds to in scientifically measurable ways. Like there was some fantastic research that was done into forest time.
Forest bathing, I think I've heard it called in Japan.
Yeah, it's called Shirin-yoku in Japan. It's forest bathing, exactly. So early on, some research was done that showed that if people had high blood pressure and they went to spend time and they did some forest time, they did some forest bathing, that time it would lower their blood pressure, but their blood pressure would also stay low for up to a month afterwards. And you think, okay, that's good. That is a scientifically measurable impact of somebody just leaving a house or a flat and going to be in and around a green space. But about 10 years later, someone else did another trial, and they said, so I was interested to find out what happened if people had low blood pressure. Because if you think if forests lower your blood pressure, then if you're pregnant or something and you're at risk of low blood pressure, mm-hmm. you just think, oh my God, you've got to stay away from the forests. And what they found was that people with high blood pressure, their blood pressure lowered after their forest time, which, as time went on, somebody eventually came up with the idea and thought, hang on, this could be really risky for people with low blood pressure. So if you were pregnant, it might mean, do not go down to the woods today because you might be in for a surprise. But again, it's a predictable outcome where it turned out that people that have low blood pressure, forest time, raised their blood pressure. So no matter what kind of blood pressure you had, forest time helps to...
It gets you into equilibrium.
Equalizer.
We talked a lot today about the foot and the cushioning and the sort of orthotic device that we've come to depend on as humans. I mean, I think the conveniences of our life, I mean, this is my takeaway as a mental health provider, that the conveniences of our life, the things that we take on that we think are going to make things better, more routine, easier, quicker, actually they're depressing because it takes away direct contact with a challenge, something that actually, we're actually quite good at getting joy from challenging things, complex things. That's what we're kind of designed. We're born to run. I think we're born to solve problems too.
But even when you skip and dance your way along a track where you're bouncing from rock to rock, where you're not running in just kind of a straight line in your shoes that make every footstep feel exactly the same.
Yes.
that's all of that stuff. It's you're problem solving with every footstep. You're problem solving. You're
glorious.
adapting. Yeah,
Yeah, and you can feel it in your body. You can feel the joy of that.
Yeah, the body feels like it's being woken up.
Yeah, I think so. Tell me about primate change, just real briefly before we close. I can hear in Footnotes a lot of foreshadowing, perhaps, about this concept, primate change.
Yeah, there's a sentence in Footnotes that says something like, and it's about that statistic about about runners that get injured at rates of 79% a year, and why would this happen? And then I wrote a sentence that said something like, the problem with modern runners is that they have an Anthropocene body, which is a body that's been made by the human environment, when what they really need is a good Paleolithic body. And then after, like a year or so after I'd finished Footnotes, I just thought, I think there's something in that sentence. And it turned out there was a book, 2 BBC series, several radio programs and lots of interviews in it. And the subtitle was How the World We Made is Remaking Us. And that's the whole book is about, how human inventions, how the human-made environment has changed the human body. And I thought when I planned the book, I thought I'd find out that maybe it meant we had a bit more back pain, or obvious things like that. And actually what I found was incredible. Human feet have grown 2 sizes in the last 4 decades. Starting from there, changes go all the way up the body to our faces. The shape of, we think of our faces as really uniquely ours. We think of them as unique to our DNA. But they're not. Our faces have been, obviously they have been created by our DNA, but the environment that they have met has changed them really quite drastically. So our jaws are narrower. Nobody can see anymore without sort of spectacles, because we spend so much time away from natural light. But another thing that's happened to our jaws is our faces have become flatter from the processed food in our diet. And because our body wants to maintain a good center of gravity, it means if you feel the back of your head where the bump is, where the sort of parietal and occipital parts of the skull meet, in pre-agricultural humans, that bump is much more pronounced. So we'd have a face that juts out more at the front and a head that bumps out more at the back. That means our brains are smaller. Because our faces are flatter, the bump at the back is also flatter. And that means our brains are actually smaller than pre-agricultural humans. So, yeah, I thought I'd find a bit of back pain, but what I found was everything from the size of our feet to the size of our brains, to the shape of our faces, to our weight, our height. Everything is governed by our environment. So it was a fascinating book to write about.
Well, I think it really will come to life for a lot of people and find it interesting. Dr. Vybarr Cregan-Reid, thank you for your time.
You're very welcome, Keith. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for listening to The Soul of Life. This is Keith Miller. Oh, and don't forget, please leave a thumbs up or a like for this episode wherever you're listening, so that others like you may find the soul of life. I mean, really, it's not every day you get to share the soul of life with someone. Okay, so you can post a comment or question on souloflifeshow.com. I'd love to hear from you. And please subscribe now to get the next episode. I look forward to sharing more of my soul of life with you.
I like it, and it's not harsh to my eardrum.
All right, I will go.